My name is Evelyn Whitaker. I am 68 years old, and tonight my husband told me not to attend my own son's celebration. The message came at 3:12 p.m. while I was standing in the laundry room, folding one of Richard's white dress shirts, the same way I had folded them for 43 years. This is Nathan's night. Don't come and confuse people. Not embarrass us, not cause trouble. Confuse people. That was the word they had started using for me over the last year. Confused, forgetful, emotional, not herself. A woman who needed decisions made for her, bills explained to her, keys taken from her purse, conversations repeated slowly as if age had turned my mind into something soft and useless. But I was not confused that afternoon. I knew exactly where I was going. Nathan was opening his new real estate office, and half the town had been invited to the country club to celebrate what he called the next chapter of the Whitaker family legacy. My husband was supposed to give a speech. My son was supposed to thank him for sacrificing the old family home to invest in the future. Our home. The one I had worked night shifts to help pay for. The one with my rose bushes beside the driveway and my daughter's height marks still penciled inside the pantry door. So I put on my blue dress from our 40th anniversary, picked up the thick envelope from the kitchen table, and drove there anyway. Before we continue, after you like and leave a comment, I want to wish you a peaceful evening, wherever you're listening from. Tell me how old you are, what city you're in, and what time it is for you right now. Maybe you've seen a woman in your life slowly become invisible in her own family. And if you have, Evelyn's story might feel very familiar. Let's continue. I remember sitting in the parking lot for a few minutes after I arrived, not because I was afraid to go in, but because old habits have a way of holding your wrist even after you have made up your mind. The country club sat up on a small hill outside town, with trimmed hedges, wide stone steps, and big windows glowing warm against the early evening. I had been there only twice before, once for a fundraiser Richard insisted we attend when he was still at the bank, and once for a retirement luncheon where I wore shoes that pinched my toes and smiled through 3 hours of women asking me what I planned to do with all my free time, as though retirement was a vacation instead of a quiet room where your life suddenly echoed. That night, the parking lot was crowded with polished cars and people dressed in soft colors, navy suits, pearl earrings, suede jackets, little things that said money without needing to say it too loudly. I could see Nathan's name printed on a sign near the entrance. Whitaker Realty, grand opening reception. Underneath, in smaller gold letters, building the next generation. I looked down at my hands. They did not look like the hands of a confused woman. They looked like hands that had held children through fevers, cleaned blood from hospital floors, signed mortgage checks, planted tomatoes, packed school lunches, changed dressings, written condolence cards, and balanced a household budget on a nurse's pay when Richard's commissions were low. There were veins raised under the skin now, spots from age, a small scar near my thumb from the year Nathan dropped a glass in the sink and I reached in too fast. But they were steady. The envelope sat on the passenger seat. It was one of those large manila envelopes with a metal clasp and a red string. I had written Nathan's name on the front in blue ink because that felt more personal than typing it. Inside were copies, never originals. Marisol had insisted on that. Never bring originals to a room full of people who need them to disappear, she had said, sitting at my kitchen table 2 nights earlier, tapping one polished nail against the stack of papers. Marisol had spent 26 years as a clerk at the county courthouse. She knew what people tried to hide, and more importantly, she knew what kind of paper made hiding impossible. I picked up the envelope, pressed it once against my lap, and stepped out of the car. The air smelled like cut grass, and expensive perfume drifting from people walking ahead of me. A couple I vaguely recognized from church passed by, and the woman turned with a surprised smile. "Evelyn, how nice to see you out." Out, as if I had been stored somewhere. "It's Nathan's night," I said, because that was easier than explaining. She touched my arm lightly, the way people had started touching me after Richard began telling them things. Not cruelly, not even knowingly, but with that careful softness people use when they believe you might break if spoken to directly. He must be so proud. "Yes," I said, "he must be." Inside, the foyer was filled with voices, the clink of glasses, and the kind of laughter people use when they are networking more than enjoying themselves. A young woman at the check-in table looked up from a list. "Name? Evelyn Whitaker." Her finger moved down the paper, then paused, then moved again. I watched her search the W's twice. "I'm sorry," she said, her face tightening with polite discomfort. "I don't see. I'm Nathan's mother." That changed her expression. But not in the way it should have. Recognition came, followed by uncertainty, as if she had been warned about me but not told what to do if I actually appeared. "Oh," she said. "Of course, let me just—" "There's no need," I said, and I smiled with all the practice a woman gathers over a lifetime. "I know where to go." I walked past her before she could decide whether to stop me. The main room opened wide beyond two double doors. White tablecloths, low centerpieces with greenery and cream roses, a bar along the back wall, a small stage at the front with a microphone, a podium, and a screen showing photographs of Nathan standing in front of houses with sold signs. In nearly every picture, he had one arm around a smiling couple or a firm handshake with a man in a suit. He had always known where to place his hands for a photograph. Even as a boy, he understood presentation. Richard stood near the stage, wearing his charcoal suit, the one I used to take to the dry cleaner every April and October. His silver hair was combed back, and he had that calm, fatherly look people trusted immediately. Beside him, Nathan was laughing with two men I didn't know. He looked handsome, successful, a little heavier than he used to be, but polished in a way that made everything underneath less visible. For a moment, I watched them. My husband and my son. Two men I had loved so deeply that I mistook loving them for understanding them. Then Richard saw me. It happened quickly, but I caught it. His smile remained, because he was too practiced to let it drop in public, but his eyes changed. The warmth left first. Then came the warning. He looked toward Nathan, leaned slightly, said something out of the corner of his mouth. Nathan turned. His face went still. Not shocked, not guilty, annoyed. That was what hurt in a small, clean way I had not expected. As if I had spilled something. As if I had shown up at the wrong time with the wrong kind of need. I did not walk toward them. I had done that for too many years, crossing rooms to smooth things over, to rescue them from discomfort, to explain myself before anyone accused me. That night I let them look at me from across the room. Then I turned toward the gift table. There were bottles of wine, cards in cream envelopes, a silver picture frame, a basket wrapped in cellophane. I placed my envelope in the middle, flat and deliberate, right where it could not be mistaken for decoration. The young man arranging the cards glanced at it. "This for Nathan?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "For Nathan and for Richard." He laughed lightly, assuming I meant it kindly. "I'll make sure it gets announced during the family tribute." "I know," I said. Behind me, I heard quick footsteps. "Evelyn." Richard's voice was low, controlled, meant only for me. I turned slowly. He stood close enough that I could smell his aftershave, the same cedar scent he had worn since 1989. It used to comfort me. That night it made me think of bank offices, locked drawers, signatures witnessed by people who never looked you in the eye. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "I came to Nathan's party." His smile stayed in place for anyone watching, but his jaw tightened. "We discussed this." "No," I said. "You texted me." His eyes flicked to the envelope on the table, then back to my face. "What is that?" "A gift. Evelyn." There it was again. My name, lowered into a warning. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I wondered how many times in our marriage I had mistaken that tone for wisdom, how many times I had grown quiet because he sounded certain, how many times I had let him explain my own life to me. "It's Nathan's night," I said softly. "Isn't that what you told me?" He leaned closer. "This is not the place." I almost laughed then, not because anything was funny, but because men like Richard always believe there is a proper place for the truth, and somehow it is never the place where other people can hear it. Before he could say more, a familiar voice came from my left. "Evelyn." Marisol Vega stood beside a table near the wall, wearing a dark red blouse, and the calm expression of a woman who had already decided where she stood. Her hair was pinned back, her purse tucked under one arm. She looked at Richard with a pleasantness sharp enough to cut paper. "Richard," she said. "Beautiful turnout." He did not like seeing her there. I could tell. "Marisol," he said. "I didn't realize you were invited." "Nathan invited half the neighborhood," she replied. "Hard to keep track." Then she looked at me, and her eyes softened just enough. "Come sit with me." Richard's hand moved, barely, as if he meant to touch my elbow. I stepped away before he could. "I'll see you during the tribute," I told him. His face changed again, just for a second. Fear is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is only a blink that comes too late. I followed Marisol to a side table where she had placed her coat on the chair beside her, saving it for me without saying so. I sat down carefully, smoothing my blue dress over my knees. The fabric caught slightly where the seam had begun to fray near the hem. I remembered wearing it 10 years earlier while Richard gave a toast about loyalty, about how a marriage was built on sacrifice. Everyone had clapped. I had smiled at him across a candlelit table and believed I knew what sacrifice meant. Across the room, Nathan climbed onto the stage to test the microphone. "Good evening, everyone," he said, and people turned toward him with warm attention. "We'll get started shortly. Tonight is about family, community, and the kind of legacy you build when people believe in you." Marisol's hand found mine under the table and squeezed once. On the screen behind Nathan, the slideshow changed. There it was. Our house on Maple Street. White siding. Green shutters. The porch Richard had complained about repainting every spring. My rose bushes blooming along the rail. Under the photo, in elegant gold letters, were the words, "The Whitaker family home where the future began." I stared at it until the room blurred at the edges. Not because I was confused, because for the first time in months, I understood everything clearly. They had already turned my home into a story they could sell. And the woman who built it was not supposed to be in the room when they did. A year before that night at the country club, the first lie came folded inside a hospital bill. That is the thing I still think about sometimes, even now. Not the shouting later, not the papers on the table, not Nathan's face when people finally began to understand. I think about the first piece of paper, how ordinary it looked. White envelope. Clear window. My husband's name printed in black ink. A balance so large my breath stopped before I even understood what I was looking at. 48,216美元，73美分. Richard sat across from me at our kitchen table with one hand pressed flat over his chest, not because he was in pain, I would understand that later, but because he knew I would look there first. I had been a nurse too long not to. Even retired, even with my license inactive and my body slower than it used to be, I still noticed breathing patterns, skin color, the way someone held themselves when they were truly afraid. He looked tired that morning, pale enough to worry me, quiet enough to frighten me. Nathan stood behind him near the sink, arms crossed, jaw tight, speaking in that controlled voice people use when they want panic to sound like responsibility. "Mom," he said, "Dad didn't want to scare you, but we can't ignore this anymore." And just like that, before I had even touched the paper, I was already being placed in the position they wanted me in. The wife who had to be protected from the truth. The mother who needed someone else to translate adult problems into softer language. Richard looked down at his coffee. "It was a small cardiac episode, not a full heart attack." "A mild heart attack," Nathan corrected. Richard closed his eyes as if the words exhausted him. I remember standing by the counter with a dish towel in my hand, still damp from drying the same 2 plates we used every morning. Blue ceramic, chipped along the edges, wedding gift from Richard's aunt in 1981. Such a small detail, but grief and fear attach themselves to the strangest things. I can still see that towel. Yellow stripes, frayed corner. I held it so tightly my fingers ached. "When?" I asked. "Last Thursday," Richard said. "Last Thursday you told me you were at the bank meeting with Phil." "I was," he said. "Afterward I didn't feel right. Nathan took me to urgent care." "To urgent care for chest pain?" I said, sharper than I meant to. Nathan stepped in immediately. "They sent him to the hospital, Mom. They ran tests. They monitored him. Everything happened fast." Everything happened fast. That became one of their favorite phrases. It explained missing details. It covered gaps. It made my questions sound inconvenient, like I was asking them to slow down an emergency for my comfort. I sat down slowly. "You should have called me." Richard reached across the table and touched my wrist. His fingers were cool. "I didn't want to upset you. I wish I could say I saw the manipulation right away, but I didn't. I saw my husband of more than 40 years sitting at the table where we had paid bills, signed birthday cards, helped our children with homework. I saw a man who had once fallen asleep in the recliner holding our daughter Claire when she had pneumonia at age 5. A man who had driven through a snowstorm to pick Nathan up from basketball practice because no son of his was going to wait alone in a school parking lot. I saw the history first. The lie came dressed in all of that. Nathan slid the bill toward me. I touched the edge of it, and the number seemed to rise off the page. $48,000? "That's the first statement," Nathan said. "There may be more." My mind began doing what it had done for decades, sorting, questioning, measuring what fit and what did not. Hospital billing could be strange, yes. Insurance could deny claims, delay processing, miscode procedures. I had seen families panic over bills that later dropped to a few $100s after adjustments. I had also seen people crushed by what insurance refused to cover. Both things could be true. That was why details mattered. "What did Medicare say?" I asked. Richard looked at Nathan. Just a glance. A tiny thing. But Nathan answered too quickly. "It's complicated. Medicare doesn't make a $48,000 patient balance appear overnight without an explanation." "Mom," Nathan said, and there was a soft warning in the word, "you don't understand how medical billing works anymore." I felt something small move inside my chest. Not anger yet, more like embarrassment. I had worked in emergency rooms for 31 years. I had explained discharge instructions to confused families at 2 in the morning. I had called insurance numbers on behalf of patients when social workers were backed up. I had watched doctors miss things and nurses catch them. I had stayed late to help an old man find a ride home because his daughter never came. I understood hospitals. I understood how frightening they could be. I understood how paperwork could turn a person into a balance due. But Nathan said it with such certainty. Anymore. As if knowledge expired at a certain age. As if retiring meant everything I had learned simply drained out of me, leaving room for their version of the world. "I'd like to see the itemized bill," I said. Richard rubbed his chest lightly. "Evelyn, please. I don't have the energy to go through all of that right now." "Then I'll call." "No," Nathan said. The room became quiet after that. He seemed to notice his tone, because he softened his face almost immediately. "Not because you can't, Mom. It's just, we already spoke with them. Dad and I. They said the issue is the cardiac monitoring and the specialist treatment plan. Some of it is out of network, some of it is classified differently, and if we don't act quickly, we could lose the chance to set up the next step." "What next step?" Richard looked down again. Nathan pulled out another sheet of paper from a folder I had not noticed before. "There's a recommended treatment program, preventative, more advanced monitoring, medication management, possible procedure if the cardiologist thinks it's necessary." "Which cardiologist?" "Dr. Hensley," Richard said. I knew Dr. Hensley. Not well, but enough. He had treated Richard's blood pressure for years. A calm man, conservative, not someone who rushed into expensive interventions without a long conversation. "I want to go with you to the appointment." Nathan exhaled. Not loudly, just enough to make me feel I had said something difficult. "Mom, that appointment already happened." I looked at Richard. He did not look back. "Without me? I didn't want you sitting in another waiting room worrying," Richard said. There it was again, protection. They kept wrapping exclusion in protection, and for a while, I accepted the wrapping because I was too afraid of what might be inside. The conversation did not end that morning. It stretched over days, then weeks, each piece added carefully until I could no longer tell where my own thoughts stopped and their urgency began. Richard began moving slower around the house. Not dramatically, not enough that I could accuse him of pretending, but just enough. He would pause halfway up the stairs and place a hand on the banister. He would leave half his dinner untouched. He would sit in the living room with the television on low, staring past it as if carrying a private fear he did not want to share. Nathan came by more often than usual. That should have made me happy. For years, I had wished he would stop treating our house like a place he passed through only on holidays or when he needed something repaired, signed, or remembered. Suddenly, he was there every other evening, bringing soup from the deli, checking Richard's pill organizer, asking me whether I had eaten. At first, I let myself be grateful. Then the question started. "Mom, do you know where the deed is?" "Mom, did Dad ever add the home equity line?" "Mom, who handles the insurance paperwork now?" He always asked gently, sometimes while taking out the trash, sometimes while standing in the pantry pretending to look for crackers. Questions folded into ordinary moments. That is how people get information from you without making it feel like an interrogation. They ask while you are rinsing lettuce, while the kettle is boiling, while you are distracted by your husband coughing in the next room. One night, maybe 2 weeks after the hospital bill appeared, Nathan stayed late after Richard went upstairs. I was washing mugs at the sink. He leaned against the counter. "Mom, we need to talk about the house." I kept my hands in the warm water. "What about it?" "You and Dad have a lot of equity." "That's good. That gives us options." "Options for what?" "For his care." I turned then. "Your father has Medicare, supplemental insurance, retirement savings, and a pension. We are not poor, Nathan." "No one said you're poor. You're talking about the house. I'm talking about keeping Dad alive. That stopped me. He knew it would. I looked toward the staircase, where the hallway light was still on. Richard had left it burning the way he did when he wanted me to think he might need me in the night. Nathan lowered his voice. If we wait until there's another episode, Mom, he may not make it through the next one. I remember the refrigerator humming, the smell of dish soap, my own heartbeat in my ears. That's not what the bill says. You're focusing on the bill because that's what you understand, he said. But this is bigger than a bill. I hated how those words landed, because part of me wondered if he was right. Maybe I was clinging to details because details were where I had always felt useful. Maybe medicine had changed. Maybe insurance had become so twisted that even an old nurse could get lost in it. Maybe my son, who moved in business circles now, knew things I did not. That is how doubt enters, not as a door kicked open, but as a little cold air under the frame. A few days later, Richard brought the subject up himself. We were sitting in the living room, rain against the windows. The house smelled faintly of lemon oil because I had polished the side table that morning, trying to keep my hands busy. I don't want to leave you with debt, he said. Then let me call the hospital. He closed his eyes. Evelyn. I hated that tone, gentle disappointment, as though I had failed to be brave in the way he needed me to be. I spent my life making decisions for this family, he continued. I'm asking you to trust me now. Trust me. For most of my marriage, those words had been enough. Trust me about refinancing. Trust me about Nathan's college loan. Trust me about Claire needing space. Trust me about not making a scene. Trust me, Evelyn. I know what I'm doing. And because I loved him, because I believed that love meant choosing faith over suspicion, I did. The next morning, Nathan arrived with a folder. Not a large one, just a thin blue folder with a few documents clipped inside. He placed it on the kitchen table beside my coffee. We don't have to sell right away, he said. There are other ways to use the house. Temporary paperwork, just to give us access if Dad's treatment escalates. What kind of access? Financial flexibility. I almost smiled at that, though nothing was funny. Richard had used that phrase for 40 years whenever something cost more than he wanted to explain. I looked through the pages. Legal language, home equity, authorization, transfer provisions, durable power of attorney mentioned in one paragraph, my name, Richard's name, Nathan's name. This looks like more than temporary paperwork. Nathan leaned forward and tapped a section with his finger. It only activates under certain conditions. What conditions? If Dad needs urgent care decisions made quickly, or if you're overwhelmed. Overwhelmed, I repeated. He touched my hand then, the way he used to when he wanted 5 more minutes before bedtime. Mom, nobody is taking anything from you. The strange thing is, when someone says that before you have accused them, some part of you hears the accusation they are trying to outrun. But I was tired. Richard looked fragile. Nathan looked worried. And somewhere deep down, I was ashamed of needing so many explanations in my own kitchen. So I signed the first page. Not all of them. Not then. But enough to begin. And when I handed the pen back to Nathan, he smiled with such relief that for one brief second I thought I had done something good for my family. That was the first lie. Not the biggest one. Not the cruelest one. Just the first one that needed my signature. The house on Maple Street was never just a house to me. I know people say that about homes all the time, especially women my age, and maybe it sounds sentimental if you have never stood barefoot in a kitchen at 2 a.m. after a double shift, eating toast over the sink because you are too tired to sit down, while a sleeping child coughs through the baby monitor, and the mortgage bill waits unopened beside the coffee maker. But that house had taken years from my body. Years from my knees, my back, my sleep, my weekends, my softness. It had taken Christmas overtime, missed school plays, bargain groceries, and the kind of quiet budgeting nobody applauds because it does not look like sacrifice from the outside. Richard liked to tell people we bought it together. And legally, at first, that was true. But I knew the walls differently. I knew which cabinet door stuck because Nathan had swung from it when he was 7 and Richard never fixed the hinge quite right. I knew the faint dent in the hallway drywall where Claire's flute case hit the wall during an argument about marching band. I knew the upstairs bathroom tile I replaced myself one July when Richard said we couldn't afford a contractor, and I spent 3 evenings on my knees watching YouTube tutorials and scraping grout with a butter knife because I refused to let mildew win in my own home. I knew the pear tree in the backyard because I planted it. That was the spring after Claire left for Portland. I told everyone I planted it because the yard needed shade, but the truth was, I missed having something young in the house. I missed the sound of doors opening and closing. I missed someone calling Mom from upstairs because they could not find socks that were directly in front of them. So I bought a small pear sapling from the garden center on Route 18, brought it home in the back of my old Ford, and dug the hole myself while Richard watched golf inside. "You'll hurt your back," he called once through the screen door. "I probably will," I said. He did not come out. The tree took years to look like anything. For a long time it was just a thin little thing tied to a stake, bending in storms, dropping leaves too early, making me wonder if I had planted it wrong. But then one year it bloomed properly, white flowers all over the branches, and I stood there in my robe before sunrise, holding coffee in both hands, feeling proud in a way that was almost embarrassing. It was just a tree. But it had stayed. That house stayed too. Through Richard's layoffs when the bank merged, through Nathan's first divorce, through Claire not coming home for Thanksgiving for 3 years after the fight no one wanted to name, through my retirement, through my first winter with nowhere to be at 6 a.m., through the months when Richard and I learned how loud a marriage can feel when the children are gone and nobody has work to hide inside anymore. So when Nathan started calling the house an asset, I felt something in me begin to pull away from him, not visibly. I still made coffee when he came over, still asked if he had eaten, still sent him home with leftovers in the square glass containers he never returned. But inside, something sat up. "It's not about selling it tomorrow," he told me one Thursday afternoon, spreading papers across the kitchen table. "It's about preparing. Dad's care could get expensive very quickly." Richard was in the living room with the television turned down low, wearing the gray cardigan I had bought him the Christmas before. He had become very good at appearing weak when paperwork came out. Not sick enough to go back to the hospital, not weak enough for me to insist on answers, but just quiet enough that if I pressed too hard, I felt cruel. I stood by the stove, stirring soup that did not need stirring. "What exactly am I signing?" I asked. Nathan looked up. "Temporary medical paperwork. Then why does it mention the property?" "Because the property is the safest way to access funds if we need them fast." "Funds for medical care?" "For Dad's care, yes. There are answers that are technically answers, but still do not say anything." I knew that. I had raised children. I had been married to Richard long enough to understand the difference between truth and wording. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and sat down. The papers had sticky tabs on the pages where I was supposed to sign. Yellow flags, blue flags, one pink flag. Nathan had always been organized when organization benefited him. I saw my name typed beside Richard's, Evelyn Marie Whitaker. There was something strange about seeing your name printed in a document you did not fully understand. It looked official, almost confident, like the paper knew more about you than you knew about it. "This says durable power of attorney," Nathan nodded. "Limited. Mostly medical and financial coordination." "Mostly?" He gave me a patient smile, and that hurt more than if he had snapped. "Mom, these forms are standard. I worked in hospitals for 31 years. I know what a medical power of attorney is. This includes financial language." He leaned back, rubbing his forehead. "Because hospitals cost money, treatments cost money, transportation, home care, specialists. You know this." I did know it. That was what made it hard. Lies are easiest to believe when they are built with pieces of truth. Care does cost money. Insurance does deny things. Families do have to make fast decisions. A spouse can decline quickly. A home can be the only real wealth ordinary people have. Every one of those things was true, and Nathan used the truth like thread to sew up the lie. Richard called from the living room, "Evelyn, please don't make this harder." I turned toward his voice. "I'm not trying to make anything harder. I just want peace," he said. Peace. That word has probably trapped more women than any locked door ever could. For the sake of peace, I had overlooked Richard speaking for me at dinner parties. For the sake of peace, I had let Nathan borrow money and never mention repayment. For the sake of peace, I had stopped correcting people when they said Claire was selfish, because explaining the truth meant reopening wounds Richard said were better left closed. Peace, in our house, usually meant I swallowed the part that hurt. Nathan pushed a pen gently toward me. "Mom, nobody is taking the house from you." I looked at him. He must have realized he had said the wrong thing, because his expression shifted, just slightly. "Why would you say it like that?" I asked. "Because I know you worry." "No, I hadn't said that." He sighed, as if I was becoming difficult in the exact way he had warned himself I might. "I'm trying to reassure you." Richard appeared in the doorway then, one hand against the frame. He looked older in that moment, and I hated that it worked on me. I hated that my fear for him softened everything else. "Ev," he said quietly, using the old name from when we were young, before mortgages and resentment and all the little disappointments people store in drawers. "I need to know you'll be all right if something happens to me." My eyes filled before I could stop them. That was the key. Not the paperwork, not Nathan's urgency, not the bill. It was that one sentence, spoken by the man whose shirts I had folded for most of my adult life. I signed the pages marked with yellow tabs, then the blue ones. When I hesitated at the pink tab, Nathan covered the paragraph lightly with his fingers and said, "That one just lets me help file things if Dad is hospitalized again." I should have moved his hand. I think about that sometimes. Such a small thing, a mother moving her son's hand off a piece of paper. How simple it sounds when you say it after everything has already happened. But in that kitchen, with soup cooling on the stove and rain tapping softly against the window over the sink, I signed there too. For a few weeks afterward, nothing obvious changed. That is another thing people misunderstand. They think when someone begins taking your life from you, you feel it immediately, like a purse snatched from your arm. But often it happens more like a slow leak under the floorboards. The house looks the same, the rooms smell the same, the mail still comes, your mug is still in the cabinet. You still turn the porch light on at dusk. Then one morning, I went to pay the property tax bill online and could not access the account. I thought I had typed the password wrong. I tried again, then again. The system locked me out. Richard was reading at the breakfast table. "Did you change the county account password?" I asked. He did not look up. "Nathan helped me update a few things." "Why?" "Security. I've paid that bill for 26 years, and now you don't have to worry about it." There it was again. The quiet removal of responsibility disguised as kindness. Later that week, a letter came from the bank addressed to Richard and Nathan Whitaker. Not Richard and Evelyn, not Mr. and Mrs. Whitaker, Richard and Nathan. I opened it because it came to my house. It referenced a home equity line of credit review. My stomach tightened, but before I could read the whole thing, Richard came in from the garage and saw it in my hand. "Why are you opening my mail?" I stared at him. "Your mail? It's about our house." He took it from me, too quickly. "It's nothing, just paperwork. Nathan's name is on it. He's helping." "With what?" Richard's face hardened in that familiar way, the one that said the conversation was over even if I was still standing there with questions in my mouth. "With keeping things in order," he said. That night, after he went to bed, I stood in the hallway outside Claire's old room for a long time. I still kept it mostly the same, though people said that was foolish. The quilt she chose at 16 was folded at the foot of the bed. A small crack ran across the corner of the mirror from the year she slammed the door too hard. In the closet, there was still a cardboard box labeled college stuff, though she was nearly 40 now and had built a life all the way across the country. I used to tell myself keeping that room was love. Richard called it denial. Nathan called it wasted space. But standing there that night, I realized something colder. They had already started speaking about the house as if I had no memory stored inside it, as if bedrooms and trees and pencil marks on pantry doors were sentimental clutter in the way of a transaction. I went downstairs and found the old deed in the metal file box under my sewing supplies. There it was. Richard Allen Whitaker and Evelyn Marie Whitaker, joint tenants with right of survivorship. My name was there. Still there. I ran my finger over it once, then twice, as if touch could protect it. But beside the file box, tucked under the newer papers Nathan had brought, was a copy of something I did not remember being explained clearly. A recorded authorization, a transfer provision, language that gave Nathan authority under conditions broad enough to make my hands go cold. If incapacitated, if unavailable, if deemed unable to manage financial affairs. Deemed by whom? The question sat in the quiet kitchen like another person. The refrigerator hummed. The porch light glowed through the curtains. Upstairs, Richard coughed once, then went silent. And for the first time, I wondered whether the danger in my house was not Richard's heart at all. Maybe it was the people asking me to sign because of it. For a long time, I believed my son was doing well. That belief didn't come from anything he said directly to me. Not really. It came from the pieces he chose to show. The photos he posted online, the ones people shared and commented on, with little bursts of admiration that felt, at the time, like something I could take quiet pride in. Nathan standing in front of a new office with glass doors and his name printed in clean, confident lettering. Nathan beside a dark SUV with a bow on the hood, smiling like a man who had figured something out the rest of us had not. Nathan at dinner with clients, plates arranged just right, lighting soft enough to make everything look successful. I would sit at the kitchen table with my coffee and scroll slowly, the way I do everything now, taking in those images as if they were proof that all the years had led somewhere good, that the sacrifices, the long nights, the things I had given up without ever listing them out loud, had turned into something solid in his life. "He's doing well," I would say to Richard sometimes. And Richard would nod in that quiet, satisfied way that men do when something reflects well on them. "He's smart," he would say. "He just needed the right opportunity." I did not question what that opportunity had cost, or who had paid for it, because I believed the version they were giving me. It is strange, looking back, how carefully a lie can be built without ever announcing itself as one. It grows in the spaces where you don't ask questions. It settles into the rhythm of daily life until it feels like part of the furniture. The first crack did not come from anything dramatic. It came from a phone call I was not supposed to hear. It was a Tuesday afternoon, late enough that the light had started to turn that soft, golden color through the kitchen window, the kind that makes even an ordinary room feel like it is holding something gentle. I had just finished wiping down the counter, more out of habit than necessity, when I realized I had left my glasses in the living room. Richard's voice carried down the hallway before I reached the doorway. "I'm telling you, this has to be done by March." I paused without meaning to. Not because I was trying to listen, but because something in his tone felt different, sharper. Not the tired, careful voice he used with me lately. This one was edged with urgency. Nathan answered from the other end of the call, his voice coming faintly through the speaker. I know, but I need time." "You don't have time," Richard said. "If we don't close by March, I'm done." There was a silence after that, not a comfortable one. The kind that stretches just long enough to make you realize you are standing somewhere you were not meant to stand. I stepped back into the hallway quietly, my hand still resting against the wall. Close what? Done with what? I could feel the questions lining up, but something in me, something that had been trained over years, told me not to walk in right then, not to interrupt, not to make it obvious I had heard anything. So I waited. A minute later, Richard's voice softened again, the way it always did when he remembered he was supposed to be calm. "We've already started the process," he said. "She's signed enough. We just need to finish it." My breath caught. She. Not Evelyn. Not your mother. Just she. Nathan said something I couldn't quite hear. Something low and tight. Then Richard again, quieter now. "I know it's not ideal, but you think I'm going to let you lose everything? You think I'm going to let people in this town see you fail like that?" Another pause. Then clearer this time, Nathan said, "I already lost enough. I can't go through that again." I stood there for a long time after the call ended. Long enough that the light shifted again, losing that golden softness and turning into something flatter, more ordinary. Long enough that the house felt different around me, as if the walls had absorbed something I could not unhear. I walked back into the kitchen slowly. The counter was still clean. The dish towel still hung over the sink. Everything looked the same. But I wasn't the same woman standing in that room anymore. That evening, Nathan came over like he always did now, letting himself in without knocking, calling out a casual, "Hey, Mom," as if nothing in the world was off balance. He kissed my cheek, just once, quick and light, then moved past me toward the fridge. "You got anything to eat?" he asked. "There's soup," I said, "left over from yesterday." He pulled it out, glanced at it, then set it on the counter without heating it. "I'll grab something later." I watched him. Not the way a mother watches her son out of habit, but the way you watch someone when you realize you may not know them as well as you thought. "You've been busy," I said. He shrugged. "That's how it goes when things are taking off." "Taking off," I repeated. "Yeah." He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "The office is doing great. I've got a couple of deals lined up. If they close, it's going to change everything." "If they close?" The words landed differently now. "What happens if they don't?" I asked. He looked at me then, really looked, as if trying to decide what I was asking and why. "They will." That's not what I asked. A small flicker crossed his face. Annoyance, maybe, or something like it. "Mom," he said, softer now, "you don't need to worry about that." There it was again. The quiet dismissal dressed as protection. I nodded slowly. "I heard you on the phone this afternoon." His posture changed, just slightly. "Talking to your dad." He straightened, then laughed once, too quickly. Yeah, we've got some deadlines. It's normal. You said if something doesn't close by March, you're done. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he picked up a spoon from the drawer, turned it in his hand, then set it back down. It's just pressure, he said finally. Every business has it. And the house? What about it? Your father said you've already started the process. He exhaled slowly, like someone deciding how much truth to give and how much to keep. Mom, you're mixing things together. Am I? Yes. He smiled then, but it didn't reach his eyes. You always do that when you get stressed. I felt that small, familiar shift again. That moment where the ground under you moves just enough that you begin to question your own footing. Maybe I do, I said. Exactly. He stepped closer, placing a hand lightly on my shoulder. That's why Dad and I are handling this, so you don't have to. So you don't have to. Not because you can't, but because you shouldn't. Because it's easier if you step back. Because it's cleaner if you stop asking questions. If you've ever given everything to your family and later realize they only come back when they need money, signatures, or your silence, then stay with me a little longer. From here, this is no longer just about a house. It's about a mother beginning to understand that the people she trusted most may be hiding something much bigger. And if you find yourself drawn to slow, honest stories that hurt a little more the deeper you go, you can subscribe gently and we'll keep going. Later that night, after Nathan left, I sat in the living room with Richard. The television was on, but neither of us was really watching it. Is Nathan in trouble? I asked. Richard didn't look at me. No. He said something about losing everything. He's being dramatic. And the house? Finally, Richard turned his head. Evelyn, he said, in that calm, measured tone I had trusted for most of my life. Everything we're doing is to protect this family. Protect. The same word over and over again. And me? I asked quietly. Is this protecting me too? He held my gaze for a moment, then looked away. Of course, but something in the way he said it told me I was no longer the one they were trying to save. I was the one they were willing to trade. The first time Richard told someone I had left the stove on, I almost corrected him with a laugh. We were standing in the front yard on a Saturday morning, the kind of morning that used to feel safe to me. Early spring, damp grass, the smell of mulch from the flower beds, a little chill still hanging in the air. Marisol was walking back from her mailbox in a gray sweater, and I had gone outside to clip a few dead branches from the rose bushes near the porch. Richard was holding a mug of coffee, watching me more than helping, which was not unusual. He had always been better at supervising work than doing it. Marisol waved. Morning, Evelyn. Those roses are coming back nicely. They're stubborn, I said, like me. She laughed, and I smiled because for 1 second everything felt normal. Then Richard said, She's lucky she remembered to come outside. Yesterday she left the stove burner on for nearly an hour. I turned to him, still holding the clippers. What? He gave Marisol a tired little smile, the kind that asked for sympathy without asking directly. It's been happening more lately. Little things. I stared at him, waiting for him to turn it into a joke, waiting for the punchline, waiting for the part where he admitted he had confused me with himself, because he was the one who had heated soup and forgotten to turn the burner all the way off. But he only took a sip of coffee. Marisol's smile faded slightly. Oh, Evelyn, I didn't leave the stove on, I said. Richard looked at me gently, almost sadly. It's all right. You don't remember. There are sentences that do not sound cruel until you feel where they land. You don't remember. He said it softly enough that anyone listening would think he was being kind, patient, protective. And I felt heat rise in my face, not because I was embarrassed by what I had done, but because I had done nothing, and somehow saying that out loud made me look worse. I do remember, I said. You made soup. Richard tilted his head. Ev. Just that. My name shortened into a warning. Marisol looked from him to me, and I saw something pass across her face. Not belief, not disbelief, attention. That was the beginning of it becoming public. Before that, the comments had mostly stayed inside the house. Richard asking where I put his reading glasses, then finding them exactly where he left them and saying, See, now you're moving things and forgetting. Nathan asking whether I had taken my blood pressure pill while the bottle was still unopened beside my breakfast plate. Richard telling me I had missed a dentist appointment that had actually been scheduled for the following week. Small corrections, small humiliations. So small that if I repeated them to someone, I sounded petty. But after the stove comment, he became braver. At church, he told Pastor Samuel I had been mixing up dates. At the grocery store, he laughed with the cashier and said, "If she comes back later for the same carton of milk, don't let her buy it twice." People chuckled because they thought marriage gave him permission to make me the joke. At a neighborhood cookout, Nathan took my paper plate from my hand and said, "Mom, you already ate," when I had not. I stood there with a plastic fork in my fingers, looking at the potato salad I had made that morning, and for a moment, I could not decide whether proving I was hungry was worth the scene it would cause. That is what they counted on. Not that I would believe them all at once. That I would grow tired of defending myself. There is a special kind of loneliness in being doubted in real time. When you are young, people may argue with your choices, but they usually believe you know what you saw, what you said, what you did. When you are older, especially as a woman, people begin to leave a little space around your certainty. They tilt their heads, they soften their voices. They ask if you're sure, but not because they want the truth. Because they have already decided your mind is a room where the lights are flickering. The car keys disappeared on a Thursday. I remember because Thursday was the day I drove to the library. I had done that for years, even after retirement. I liked the routine of it. Return books, browse the new releases, sit by the window for half an hour with a magazine I had no intention of finishing. Then stop at Martin's Market for apples, bread, and the good cinnamon tea Claire liked when she visited, even though she had not visited in nearly 2 years. I reached into the ceramic bowl by the door. Empty. I checked my purse, the kitchen counter, the pocket of my raincoat, the small table by the stairs. Richard sat in the recliner, watching the financial news with the sound too low to hear. "Have you seen my keys?" "No. I put them in the bowl. Did you?" I closed my eyes briefly. "Yes, Richard." He muted the television. "Maybe you should stay home today. I'm going to the library. It can wait. I don't want it to wait." He looked toward the hallway, and a minute later Nathan came in through the back door without knocking, holding the spare key we kept under the flower pot, though I had told Richard many times I did not like it there. "Morning," Nathan said. "Everything okay?" "My keys are missing." He exchanged a look with Richard. Not even a hidden one. A tired one. As if they had discussed this before I entered the room. Nathan reached into his jacket pocket and placed my keys on the table. "I took them last night." "You what?" "For safety." The word sounded clean in his mouth. "Safety. You took my car keys without asking me?" "Mom, you backed into the trash cans last week." "I bumped one trash can in the driveway. You didn't see it. It was behind the car." "That's the point." I looked at Richard. "You let him take my keys?" Richard sighed. "We're just trying to prevent an accident. I have driven for 50 years, and maybe it's time to slow down." I heard myself raise my voice then, not much, but enough. "You do not get to decide that for me." Nathan's face tightened. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. You get upset whenever we try to help. I'm upset because you stole my keys." "See?" Richard said quietly. "This agitation. This is what I mean. Agitation." Another word added to the file they were building around me. By the time they took me to Dr. Bellamy, I understood enough to be afraid, but not enough to stop it. Dr. Bellamy had been our family physician for almost 15 years. A kind woman, practical, always running behind schedule, with reading glasses she wore on a chain and a framed picture of her golden retriever on the exam room wall. I trusted her, or I thought I did, but I also knew doctors were busy, and busy people often hear the first confident story as the true one. Richard sat on my left, Nathan sat on my right. That should have told me everything. Dr. Bellamy looked at her tablet. "So, Evelyn, your family has some concerns." "I'm sure they do," I said, and Nathan gave a small embarrassed laugh, as if I were already proving their point. Richard leaned forward. "She's been forgetting things, leaving burners on, missing appointments, misplacing keys." I did not leave a burner on. Nathan touched my arm. "Mom." I pulled away. Dr. Bellamy glanced at that movement, and I saw it register. Not the lie. My reaction to the lie. "She gets defensive," Richard said softly. "That's new." "Wouldn't you?" I asked. The room grew quiet. Dr. Bellamy gave me a gentle smile. "Evelyn, no one is accusing you of anything. We just want to make sure you're safe." Safe again. That word was everywhere now, like wallpaper. She asked me questions. Date, month, president, count backward from 100 by sevens. Remember 3 words: apple, table, penny. I answered them all. She had me draw a clock. I drew it perfectly, though my hand shook because I was angry, and I hated that my anger might look like confusion. At the end, she said, "Your screening looks normal today." Relief moved through me so quickly I almost cried. But then she added, "Still, given the concerns at home, I'd recommend a full cognitive evaluation. Sometimes early changes don't show up in a brief screening." Richard nodded as if this were exactly what he expected. Nathan said, "Thank you, doctor. We just want to be proactive." I sat there on the paper-covered exam table, my feet not quite touching the floor, feeling suddenly like a child in my own life. On the drive home, no one spoke for 10 minutes. Then Richard said, "You didn't need to be so hostile." I answered every question correctly. "That's not the point." "What is the point?" He kept both hands on the wheel, eyes forward. "The point is that we need documentation." The word came out before he could soften it. Documentation. I turned my head slowly. Nathan was in the back seat, looking down at his phone. "For what?" I asked. Richard did not answer. That evening, Marisol knocked on my back door with a container of chicken stew and 2 pieces of cornbread wrapped in foil. "I made too much," she said, which was the lie neighbors tell when they are worried but respectful. Richard was upstairs. Nathan had left. I let her in. She set the food on the counter and looked at me for a moment. "Evelyn," she said quietly, "are you forgetting things?" I wanted to say no immediately. I wanted to sound certain, strong, offended. But instead my eyes filled, and I hated that too. "I don't think so," I said. She pulled out a chair and sat down without asking. "That's not what I asked." I looked at her. She was not using Richard's gentle voice or Nathan's patient one. She was looking at me like an equal. "No," I said clearer this time. "I am not forgetting things." Marisol nodded once. "Then start writing everything down." I frowned. "What?" "Dates, times, what they say you did, what really happened, who was there. Keep receipts, keep copies. If they say you missed an appointment, write the real date. If they say you left the stove on, write who used it last." My hands were cold around the mug in front of me. Why would I need to do that? Marisol's face softened, but her eyes did not. "Because, honey, when people start calling a woman confused, they are usually getting ready to take something from her." I looked toward the hallway, toward the stairs, toward the rooms of the house I had kept alive for decades. And for the first time, the fear inside me had a shape. The first real proof did not come from a lawyer's office or a bank statement or some dramatic confession whispered in the dark. It came from the basement of First Methodist Church, between a box of old Easter programs and a stack of donation envelopes from 2017. I have thought about that many times since, how strangely ordinary truth can look when it finally decides to show itself. Not bright, not loud, not wrapped in mourning. Just a photocopied sheet of paper with 3 staple holes on the side, tucked into the wrong folder by someone who probably had no idea what they were saving me from. Pastor Samuel had called me that morning because the church office was being repainted, and they needed help sorting old records before the painters came. I had done small things for the church for years. Folding bulletins, making casseroles for funerals, sitting with widows during coffee hour when everyone else was busy talking about grandchildren and vacation plans. It was the kind of work nobody noticed unless it stopped being done. "Evelyn," Pastor Samuel said on the phone, "I know you've had a lot going on, so please say no if you're tired." That small kindness almost made me cry. Not because the work was difficult, but because he gave me the right to refuse. Lately, so many people spoke to me as if my yes or no had become decorative. "I'd be glad to help," I told him. Richard was at his desk in the den when I put on my coat. "Where are you going?" he asked without looking up. "The church. Pastor Samuel needs help with records." He lifted his eyes then. "Alone?" I buttoned my coat slowly. "I've been going to that church for 38 years, Richard." "That's not what I asked." "No," I said, picking up my purse. "You asked if I was capable of driving 5 blocks and sorting paper." His mouth tightened. A month earlier, I would have softened that sentence. I would have added a little laugh, touched his shoulder, made peace before leaving the room. But Marisol's words had stayed with me, steady as a hand on my back. "Write everything down." So I had begun writing. March 3rd, Richard says I left kettle boiling. I did not use kettle. He made tea at 9:15 p.m. March 6th, Nathan says, I forgot Claire's birthday. False. Card mailed February 27th. Receipt in drawer. March 8th, car keys removed again. Nathan admitted for safety. The notebook was hidden in an old sewing basket under loose fabric. Marisol said people rarely search places they consider women's clutter. At the church, Pastor Samuel met me at the side entrance with a key ring in one hand and a paper cup of coffee in the other. He was in his late 50s then, with kind eyes and thinning hair, the kind of man who always looked slightly overwhelmed by both God and plumbing problems. "I'm sorry about the mess," he said as he led me down the narrow stairwell. "Half these boxes should have been scanned 10 years ago." "Church basements are where paper goes to wait for resurrection," I said. He laughed, and the sound warmed me more than I expected. The basement smelled like dust, old coffee, cardboard, and faintly of the lemon cleaner the women's committee used before bake sales. A folding table had been set up under buzzing fluorescent lights. Around it were plastic storage bins labeled with years and events: Christmas drive, mission fund, youth retreat, building repairs, benevolence. Pastor Samuel showed me what to keep and what to shred. Tax documents, donor acknowledgments, pledge records, anything involving restricted gifts. He apologized 3 times for leaving me alone when a call came in from the hospital. "Take your time," he said. "If anything looks official, just set it aside." Official. That word stayed with me. For nearly an hour, I sorted quietly. I found checks from people long gone, names I remembered from pews now filled by younger families. Mrs. Adler, who always wore lavender. George Pines, who sang too loudly and off-key but with such joy no one minded. People gave what they could, $10, $50, sometimes $500 in memory of someone they loved. There was tenderness in those records. A whole history of ordinary generosity no one would ever post online. Then I opened a folder labeled Community Partnership Pledges. Most of it was simple. Local businesses sponsoring Thanksgiving baskets. A dentist office donating toothbrushes. A hardware store paying for roof repairs after a storm. Near the back, I found a copy of a pledge agreement with Richard's name at the top. At first, I smiled without thinking. Richard had always liked being seen as generous. He gave just enough publicly to be known for giving, and just little enough privately to complain about it later. Then I read the second line. Richard A. Whitaker pledges financial support in the amount of $52,000 toward the stabilization and continuation of Whitaker Realty Group, owned and operated by Nathan Whitaker. I stopped breathing for a second. The paper trembled in my hand, though I told myself it was only the cold basement air. The date was February 12th. The same week Richard had sat at the kitchen table with the hospital bill. The same week Nathan said Dad might not make it through another episode if we didn't act quickly. The same week I was told that medical costs could take everything if I didn't trust them. I read it again. 1,500 yuan. Not $4,800. Not $5,200. $52,000. My eyes moved lower on the page. Purpose of pledge: emergency business rescue loan to prevent closure, investor default, and reputational damage related to delayed real estate development returns. There it was. Not medical care, not cardiac treatment, not specialist monitoring. Business rescue loan. I sat down on the metal folding chair because my knees had gone loose. I remembered Nathan's SUV, the office doors, the Facebook posts about growth and legacy. I remembered Richard saying, "You think I'm going to let people in this town see you fail like that?" I remembered the way Nathan's face changed when I asked what happened if the deals didn't close. I lowered the paper to the table and pressed both palms flat beside it. For months, they had made me feel like the unstable one, the emotional one, the woman who could not remember, could not understand, could not safely drive to the library or read a legal form or ask a question without being labeled agitated. But that paper did not forget. It did not soften its voice. It did not say I was confused. It just sat there, quiet and clear. I looked around the basement, half expecting Richard or Nathan to appear from behind the stacks of boxes, though of course they didn't. There was only the hum of the lights and the muffled footsteps of someone moving upstairs. Then I saw the handwritten note at the bottom. Not part of the typed agreement, just a note in black pen near Richard's signature, copied faintly but still readable. Funds secured after house transfer. Finalize before March close. I read those words 3 times. After house transfer. Finalizing before March. The basement seemed to tilt slightly around me. I thought of the papers Nathan had placed in front of me with colored tabs, the paragraph he had covered with his hand, the pink flag, the way he said, "Nobody is taking the house from you," before I ever accused him of it. I thought of Richard asking me to trust him. Richard saying he wanted peace. Richard letting people believe my memory was slipping while he used my fear to move pieces of my life into position. A sound came out of me then, small and embarrassing, almost like a laugh, but not one. I covered my mouth, not because I was amused, because somewhere between heartbreak and clarity, the body does not always know what to do. Pastor Samuel came back downstairs 10 minutes later, carrying another box. "You all right down here?" he asked. I looked up too quickly. "Yes." He studied my face. "You look pale." "It's dusty," I said. He set the box down. "You sure?" For a moment I almost told him. I almost turned the paper around and said, "Pastor, why is my husband promising $52,000 to my son while telling me he needs money for his heart?" But I did not. Not yet. Marisol had told me another thing. Don't reveal what you know until you know what it connects to. So I folded my fear and placed it carefully behind my ribs. "I actually found something Nathan might need," I said. And even to my own ears, my voice sounded calm in a way that surprised me. "It looks like an old partnership pledge for his office. Do you mind if I take a picture? He's been organizing business files." Pastor Samuel looked relieved to have an ordinary explanation. "Of course, just don't take the original. We need to keep church records intact." "I understand." My phone felt heavy in my hand as I opened the camera. I took one photo, then another closer, then one of Richard's signature, one of the date, one of the handwritten note. I checked each picture to make sure the words were clear. Funds secured after house transfer. Finalized before March close. I slid the paper back exactly where I had found it, between a landscaping sponsorship and a roofing donation. My hands were still shaking, so I tucked them under the table for a moment before Pastor Samuel noticed. When I left the church, the sky had turned gray, and a cold drizzle had begun to fall. I sat in my car with the door closed, listening to rain tick softly against the windshield. I did not start the engine right away. Instead, I opened the photos again. There it was on my phone. Proof that something had been planned while I was being told to trust. Proof that the hospital bill might not have been the crisis at all, only the story they used to make me sign. I thought I would cry. I didn't. I just felt very still, like a nurse standing over a patient whose symptoms finally made sense. That afternoon, I drove straight to Marisol's house. She opened the door wearing reading glasses and holding a dish towel, and before she could say hello, I held out my phone. "Look at this," I said. She took it, read the first photo, then the second. By the time she reached the handwritten note, her mouth had become a thin line. "Oh, Evelyn," she whispered. I waited for her to tell me maybe I misunderstood. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe I was mixing things together. She did not. She looked up at me and said, "Now we start making copies." By the time I walked into Marisol Vega's kitchen with that church document on my phone, I was no longer looking for reassurance. That may sound small, but for me it was not. For months, I had been hoping someone would tell me there was another explanation, that Richard was just frightened, that Nathan was under pressure but still my son, that the papers, the whispered conversations, the missing keys, the doctor's visit, the little public jokes about my memory, all of it was just a terrible misunderstanding stitched together by stress. But when Marisol read the words, "business rescue loan," and "funds secured after house transfer," she did not tilt her head or soften her voice. She did not tell me to calm down. She did not ask whether I was sure. She placed my phone gently on the table, took off her reading glasses, and said, "Evelyn, listen to me carefully. Don't argue with people who benefit from making you look confused. Write everything down." And that was the moment I stopped trying to convince my family I was sane. I started proving it. Marisol's kitchen was smaller than mine, but warmer somehow. She had yellow curtains over the sink, a bowl of oranges on the counter, and a little ceramic rooster beside the stove that I had always thought was ugly until that afternoon, when its ordinary silliness nearly made me cry. I think when your own house stops feeling safe, other people's normal things begin to look beautiful. She poured coffee into 2 mugs and pushed one toward me. "Now," she said, "tell me everything from the beginning. Not emotionally, not how it felt. What happened? Dates if you have them." I sat at her round table, my coat still on, and began. At first, I stumbled. I kept trying to explain Richard, instead of recording him. "He was worried," I said. "He said the hospital bill was complicated. Nathan said—" Marisol lifted one hand. "No, write what they said, not what you think they meant." She gave me a spiral notebook from a drawer, the kind with a blue cardboard cover. On the first page, she wrote the date, then handed me the pen. "Start with the hospital bill." So I wrote, February 12. Richard showed me hospital bill for $48,216.73. Said cardiac episode. Nathan present. Nathan said medical billing changed and I didn't understand it anymore. Seeing it written down changed something. It took the memory out of the fog they had been trying to put around it and placed it on the page where it could not be interrupted. Then we wrote the next thing. February 16. Nathan brought paperwork, said it was temporary medical paperwork. Pages included financial language and home equity access. Richard said, "Please don't make this harder." Then the next. March 3. Richard told Marisol I left stove on. I did not use stove. Richard made soup. March 8. Nathan took my car keys for safety. March 11. Dr. Bellamy visit. Richard and Nathan reported memory concerns. Screening normal. Richard said on drive home, "We need documentation." When I reached that line, Marisol's face tightened. "There it is," she said quietly. I looked up. "What?" "Documentation. That's not a husband worrying. That's a man building a file." I felt cold, even with the coffee mug between my hands. Affile. Not for my protection. Against me. Maybe you understand that feeling. The feeling that you have lived decently, paid the bills, raised children, kept the house standing, forgiven more than people deserved, and then one day the very people you protected begin speaking about you as if you are no longer capable of deciding your own life. Evelyn did not need pity. She needed one person to believe she still remembered exactly what had happened. For the next 2 weeks, I became quiet in a different way. Not the old quiet, the one I had mistaken for peace. This was watchful quiet, patient quiet. The kind of quiet I used to have in emergency rooms when a patient's numbers looked stable but something in my body told me to stay close. I kept the notebook in my sewing basket under scraps of fabric from projects I never finished. Every evening, after Richard went upstairs, I wrote down the day. Sometimes there was only one line. Sometimes there were 3 pages. March 14. Richard asked if I remembered paying electric bill. I paid it March 10. Confirmation number written on receipt. March 15. Nathan came by at 7:20 p.m. Took blue folder from Den. Said Dad asked for it. Richard later denied knowing. March 17. Phone call from Claire at 6:42 p.m. Richard answered before I reached phone. Told her I was resting. I was in kitchen. That last one bothered me more than I wanted to admit. Claire and I had not been close for years, not in the way mothers and daughters are supposed to be close. There had been distance, some of it natural, some of it painful, and some of it I was beginning to suspect, created by other people. She called less often than I wanted, but when she did, Richard had a way of appearing near the phone. He would answer first or interrupt, or later tell me she sounded busy and I shouldn't burden her. I had believed him. I had believed so much. Marisol helped me with the practical things. She brought over a small flash drive and showed me how to save voicemail messages. She taught me to take photos of documents with the corners visible, then email them to a new account Richard did not know about. She stood beside me at the public library while I printed bank records because my home printer had suddenly stopped working after Nathan borrowed it. Coincidence, Marisol said dryly, feeding quarters into the copy machine. I used to hate women who sounded suspicious of everything, I said. She looked at me over her glasses. Suspicion is just pattern recognition after someone lies to you. We printed property tax records. We printed the old deed. We printed the pages I had signed with Nathan's sticky tabs, still visible in the photos I had secretly taken later. We printed the church pledge. We printed the email Richard had sent to Nathan from our shared desktop, the one he forgot to delete from the sent folder. Subject. Timing. Nathan, we need to move before the end of March. If your mother starts asking questions, let me handle it. She'll panic if she thinks my health is at risk. Use that. I read that email at the library computer with my hands resting in my lap because I no longer trusted them not to shake. She'll panic if she thinks my health is at risk. Not she'll understand. Not she'll help. Not will tell her the truth. Use that. Marisol stood beside me, silent. I printed 3 copies. The real break came on a Thursday afternoon when Richard left for a haircut and Nathan forgot that old people sometimes know how to check mail. A bank envelope arrived, addressed to Richard A. Whitaker and Nathan P. Whitaker. I took it into the pantry, closed the door, and opened it with a butter knife the way my mother used to open Christmas cards without tearing the flap. Inside was a statement for the home equity line. Current draw, $48,300. Transfer date, February 18. Recipient: Whitaker Realty Group operating account. I read it once, then again, then a third time, because the body sometimes refuses to accept what the eyes have already done. $48,300. Not to the hospital, not to a cardiologist, not to any treatment center, to Nathan's company. The amount was so close to the fake hospital bill that it felt almost insulting. They had not even bothered to be clever. They had simply counted on me being too frightened, too trusting, too confused to line up the numbers. I photographed every page on the pantry shelf beside the flour canister. Then I drove to Marisol's with the statement tucked inside an old church bulletin. She opened the door, looked at my face, and stepped aside without a word. At her kitchen table, I laid the papers down. She read them carefully, one page at a time. When she finished, she sat back and exhaled. "There it is," she said. I looked at the statement between us. For a moment, I did not feel angry. Not yet. What I felt was grief, clean and terrible. My husband had used his own body as a weapon against my love. My son had taken the house I built and turned it into a rescue fund for his failure. And both of them had stood close enough to kiss my cheek while doing it. "What do I do now?" I asked. Marisol reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. "Now," she said, "we stop letting them control the story." That night, I went home and cooked dinner as if nothing had changed. Meatloaf, green beans, mashed potatoes from a box because Richard preferred them smoother than homemade, though I had always pretended not to mind. Nathan came by around 7, ate at the table, talked about permits and office furniture, and how exhausting success could be when people depended on you. I listened. I passed him the salt. I watched Richard nod proudly at every word. And later, when they both stood in the hallway speaking quietly, thinking I was in the laundry room, I turned on the voice memo app Marisol had shown me and placed my phone inside the pocket of my cardigan. Richard said, "We just need her steady until the final review." Nathan answered, "And if Claire calls again? Don't let them talk long. Your sister always makes her question things." I stood in the laundry room, folding towels with my phone recording against my hip. For the first time in months, my hands did not shake. I was not confused. I was keeping receipts. The letter from Claire arrived on a Friday, folded into a pale yellow envelope with my name written in a hand I still recognized before I fully understood why. That is what nearly broke me first. Not the words inside. Not yet. Just the handwriting. My daughter's handwriting had always leaned slightly to the right, the letters narrow and careful, as if she had been trying since childhood to take up less space than her brother. When she was little, she used to write notes and slip them under my bedroom door after arguments. "I'm sorry," I yelled. "I still love you. Please don't tell Dad," I cried. I stood at the kitchen counter holding that envelope for a long time. Richard was in the den. I could hear the low murmur of the television, some financial program he claimed to watch for market updates but mostly used as a wall between us. Nathan was not there, thank God. The house was quiet enough that I could hear the refrigerator click on, then the little rattle in the vent above the sink that Richard always said he would fix. There was no return address on the envelope. Just a Portland postmark. My hands went cold before I opened it. I had not spoken to Claire properly in months. Not really. There had been calls, but never long ones. Always interrupted. Always poorly timed. Richard would answer first and say I was resting. Nathan would tell me later that Claire had called but sounded distant or busy or like she was only checking in because she felt guilty. Over time, the space between us had hardened into something I did not know how to cross. And then came her letter. "Mom, I don't know if you'll ever actually see this. I hope you do. I'm sending it to the house because my emails keep bouncing back, and when I call, Dad says you're sleeping or too tired or not having a good day. Nathan told me last week that I should stop upsetting you and that if I really cared, I would let him and Dad handle things." I read that first paragraph 3 times. Then I sat down. The chair made a small scraping sound against the kitchen tile, and I froze, listening for Richard. Nothing. Only the television. Claire continued. "I need you to know something. I have tried to come home twice this year. In February, Dad told me you didn't want visitors because you were embarrassed about your memory problems. In March, Nathan told me you had become angry whenever my name came up and that I should give you space. I didn't understand it, Mom. It hurt, but I thought maybe you were really struggling and maybe pushing me away was part of that." My throat tightened. I had never said that. Not once. In February, I had asked Richard whether Claire might visit in the spring, and he told me she was too busy. In March, I had mentioned missing her while folding towels in the laundry room, and Nathan said, "Mom, Claire only reaches out when she thinks there might be money involved." I remember how casually he said it, as if it were already known between us, as if a daughter could be reduced to a motive and placed neatly aside. The letter blurred, so I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand and kept reading. "I also need you to know I sent money. 3 times. Not because Dad asked, because I was worried. After Nathan told me about Dad's heart issue and the bills, I mailed checks to help. One for $2,000 in February, one for $1,500 in March, and one for $2,500 in April. All 3 were returned. The envelopes came back marked, refused. When I asked Dad, he said you were offended and didn't want my charity." I pressed my hand over my mouth. A sound almost escaped me, and I swallowed it down so hard it hurt. Refused. I had never seen those checks. I had never seen those envelopes. I had never been told my daughter, the daughter I believed had drifted so far from me she could barely pick up the phone, had tried to help. I got up slowly and went to the hallway, still holding the letter. The den door was half closed. Richard's back was to me. He sat in his leather chair with one ankle crossed over the other, remote in hand, looking comfortable in the house he was quietly preparing to take from me. For one wild second, I wanted to walk in and ask him right there, "Did you return Claire's checks? Did you tell my daughter I didn't want her here? Did you let me sit in this house feeling abandoned, while you used that loneliness to make me easier to control?" But Marisol's voice came back to me. "Don't argue with people who benefit from making you look confused." So I walked back to the kitchen. I folded the letter once, carefully along the line Claire had already made, then opened it again because I needed to finish. "Mom, I don't believe you don't want me. Maybe that's foolish. Maybe Dad is right, and I'm making this about myself. But something feels wrong. Nathan keeps talking about the house like it's already decided. Dad keeps saying you're not able to handle stress. And when I asked for copies of the medical bills, Nathan told me I was being selfish and suspicious. There was a line scratched out there, then rewritten beneath it. I am suspicious. Good, I thought. For the first time in a long time, I felt something like pride through the pain. The last paragraph was shorter. "If this letter reaches you, please call me from a phone Dad and Nathan don't have access to. If you don't want to talk, I'll respect that. But I need to hear it from you, not them. I love you, Mom." I never stopped. Claire. I sat at the table until the light outside began to fade. There are griefs that come with noise, and there are griefs that come so quietly you almost don't realize the room has changed. That letter did not just tell me Richard and Nathan had lied about money. It told me they had taken my daughter from me in pieces. A missed call here, a returned check there, a sentence repeated with just enough poison to make me hesitate. They had not only tried to control my house, they had tried to control who could reach me inside it. And I had believed too much of it. That was the part that hurt in a place I did not know how to touch. After dinner, I told Richard I had a headache and went upstairs early. I closed the bedroom door, turned on the bathroom fan, and called Marisol from my cell phone with the shower running so Richard would hear water if he passed by. "I got a letter from Claire," I whispered. Marisol did not interrupt once as I read it to her. When I finished, she said, "Come over tomorrow morning, bring the letter. We're calling her from my house." I don't know what to say to her. "Yes, you do." "No," I said, and my voice finally broke. I don't know how to explain that I let them make me think my own daughter didn't care." Marisol was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You don't have to explain everything first. Sometimes you start with, 'I'm sorry I didn't know.'" The next morning, I told Richard I was going to Marisol's to help with church donation receipts. He looked irritated but not suspicious. To him, women's errands were harmless. That was one of the few advantages I had left. At Marisol's kitchen table, with the yellow curtains glowing in the morning sun, I dialed Claire's number. My finger hovered over the call button for so long Marisol reached across and gently touched my wrist. "She sent the letter," she said. "She wants you to call." So I did. Claire answered on the second ring. "Hello?" For a moment, I could not speak. "Claire," I said finally. There was a sharp inhale on the other end. "Mom?" Just that one word undid me. I had heard my daughter say Mom thousands of times in my life. Angry, tired, sick, excited, teenage, impatient, laughing, crying. But I had never heard it like that. like she was afraid the sound might disappear if she trusted it too quickly. "I got your letter," I said. She started crying before I did. "I didn't know what else to do," she said. "I thought maybe they wouldn't give it to you. They didn't see it." "Thank God." I closed my eyes. Marisol sat across from me, hands folded, looking down to give me privacy even though she stayed close enough to steady me if I needed it. "Claire," I said, "I never refused your checks." Silence. Then, very softly, "I knew it. I never said I didn't want you to visit." "I knew that too," she whispered, but her voice cracked in the middle. "I asked about you. They told me you were busy. They told me you thought I was becoming difficult. Nathan said you only cared about the house." She made a sound then, not quite a sob, not quite a laugh. "He told me you were obsessed with the house and paranoid about money." Paranoid. There it was again. Another label. Another box they had built for me. We talked for nearly an hour. Not smoothly. There were too many broken places for that. Sometimes one of us would begin a sentence and stop because the hurt underneath it was too large. Claire told me she had tried to visit in March, had even booked a flight, but Richard called her the night before and said my doctor advised against emotional stress. She told me Nathan had warned her that if she pushed too hard, it could affect the evaluation, though she didn't know what evaluation he meant. She told me she had cried in the airport parking lot and canceled the trip because she thought coming might hurt me. I told her about the hospital bill, the papers, the church document, the home equity transfer. She went very quiet. "Mom," she said finally, "that's not just lying. That's a plan." "I know. Do you have copies?" "Yes." "Good. Make more." That sounded so much like Marisol that I almost smiled. Then Claire said, "I can come home." My first instinct was to say yes. My second was fear. If Richard knew Claire and I were talking, everything could move faster. Nathan might hide documents. Richard might push harder with Dr. Bellamy. They had already spent months making me look unstable. A sudden visit from the daughter they had labeled difficult might only help them frame me as emotional. "Not yet," I said, and it hurt to say it. "I need you close, but not visible. Not until we know everything." Claire was quiet, then answered, "Okay, but I'm not disappearing again." I looked at the letter on Marisol's table, my daughter's handwriting slanting across the page, proof that love had been trying to reach me while lies stood at the door. "No," I said. "Neither am I." When I got home that afternoon, Richard was in the kitchen, opening mail. "Anything interesting?" he asked without looking at me. I set my purse on the chair. "No," I said calmly, "just church things." He nodded, satisfied. And for the first time, I understood something important. They had separated Claire from me because she would have believed me too quickly. They had called Marisol nosy because she watched too closely. They had made me feel alone because alone women are easier to move. But I was not alone anymore. There is a moment when you are standing in your own home, when something you have touched every day for years suddenly feels like it belongs to someone else. It does not happen loudly. It happens in the quiet, in the way a drawer slides a little too easily, or a folder is placed where you know you did not leave it, or a sentence you overhear fits too neatly with something you found days before. It is the moment when the shape of a lie becomes large enough that you can no longer step around it. For me, that moment came with a brown envelope tucked behind a stack of old tax files in the cabinet Richard had told me not to bother organizing anymore. "Too much for you," he had said casually a week earlier. "We'll handle it." We. That word again. I found the envelope on a Tuesday afternoon while Richard was at the barber and Nathan was, according to him, closing something big. The house was quiet in that particular way it gets when no one is watching you, when even the walls seem to relax their attention. I was not looking for anything specific. That is the truth. But once you start noticing patterns, your hands begin to move differently. You open folders you used to skip. You read headings instead of trusting labels. You touch papers not because you need them, but because you no longer trust that they are harmless. The envelope had no name on it, just a printed address in the corner. I slid my finger under the flap slowly, the way I had done with the bank statement weeks before, careful not to tear anything that might later matter. Inside was a formal document, several pages clipped together. Real estate appraisal report. I sat down at the dining table before reading further. There are some truths you feel in your body before your eyes confirm them. Property address, 184 Willow Creek Lane. My house. Our house. Market value estimate, $412,000. The number sat there, steady, unashamed. $412,000. I let out a slow breath I did not realize I had been holding. Just 2 weeks earlier, Nathan had stood in this same dining room, leaning against the counter with his phone in his hand, and told me, "Mom, the house isn't worth what you think. It's old, the wiring is outdated, the roof will need work soon. We'd be lucky to get $250, maybe less if the inspection turns up issues." I remember how he had said it. Not cruelly, not aggressively, but with that careful tone people use when they are explaining something to someone they believe cannot understand the full picture. I had nodded then, not because I believed him, because I was still trying to figure out why I felt like I shouldn't. Now I looked down at the appraisal again. 41,200美元. I turned the page. Comparative sales, recent renovations in nearby homes, adjustments for square footage, notes about the backyard, the pear tree I had planted 23 years ago, the kitchen cabinets I had refinished myself one summer when we couldn't afford new ones. Condition, well-maintained, minor cosmetic updates recommended. Minor, not falling apart, not barely holding value. Minor. My hands were steady now, not because I was calm, because something inside me had moved past shock and into a colder place. I kept reading. Toward the end of the packet, there was another document attached. Purchase agreement draft. Buyer, Willow Creek Holdings, LLC. Seller, Richard A. Whitaker. I read that line twice. Then a third time. My name was not there. I flipped back to the first page, then forward again, as if somewhere between the lines my name might appear if I looked hard enough. It didn't. Seller, Richard A. Whitaker. Not Evelyn Whitaker. Not Richard and Evelyn. Just him. A small, precise absence that felt louder than any accusation. The agreed sale price was listed on the next page. 23,200美元. I did not react right away. My mind did the math before my emotions could catch up. 412,000. 232,000. A difference of $180,000. Not a mistake. Not a rounding error. A decision. I placed both hands flat on the table again, the same way I had in the church basement, grounding myself in something solid. The buyer name meant nothing to me at first. Willow Creek Holdings, LLC. But the address listed for the LLC was familiar. Not because I had seen it on a sign or a letterhead. Because it matched the business address Nathan had used on one of his earlier filings, the ones he had shown Richard at the kitchen table months ago when they thought I was not paying attention. I closed my eyes for a moment. So this was the plan. Not just to take the house, to take it cheaply, to move it through a company connected to Nathan, to fix what they had called minor cosmetic issues, then sell it again at full value, maybe higher, and keep the difference. My life, my years, my work, turned into margin. I flipped to the final page. Signature line, Richard A. Whitaker. Date, April 13. And beneath it, a blank line. Closing scheduled, April 30. I stared at the date, April 13. I did not need to check my calendar. I already knew what day that was. The grand opening of Nathan's office. The country club. The speech about family legacy. The moment he planned to stand in front of people and thank his father for sacrificing the old house to invest in the future. The room seemed to narrow around me. Everything lined up. The fake hospital bill in February. The paperwork in mid-February. The home equity transfer days later. The appraisal done quietly. The purchase agreement drafted. The gaslighting. The doctor visit. The narrative that I was no longer stable enough to understand. All of it moving toward that date. Not randomly. Deliberately. I stood up and walked slowly to the kitchen sink, not because I needed water, but because I needed to move. Outside, the pear tree was beginning to bloom. Small white flowers, delicate, almost translucent in the afternoon light. I had planted that tree when Claire was still in high school. She used to sit under it with her books in the spring, complaining about homework and laughing 5 minutes later about something her brother said. Nathan had carved his initials into the trunk when he was 12. I had scolded him for it then, told him trees deserved respect. Now I wondered if he remembered that, or if the tree was just another feature on a listing to him. I went back to the table. Carefully, methodically, I took out my phone and photographed every page. The appraisal, the purchase agreement, the dates, the numbers, the LLC name. I zoomed in on the signature line, on the blank space where my name should have been, on the closing date, April 13. Then I placed the documents back exactly as I had found them. Sama order. Same angle. Sama envelope. If Richard or Nathan checked, nothing would look disturbed. That evening, when Richard came home, he kissed my cheek as if nothing in the world had changed. "How was your day?" he asked, loosening his tie. "Quiet," I said. Nathan came by later, talking about the final details for the opening. "Big turnout expected," he said. "A lot of local investors, some city people, even a couple from the county board. It's going to be good for business." I listened. I nodded at the right moments. "And we're doing a short speech," he added. "About family. About where we came from, you know." I looked at him then. "Do I?" I asked softly. He smiled a little uncertain. "Yeah, you know, legacy. Legacy." I thought of the appraisal folded in the cabinet, of the missing $180,000, of the line that erased me as seller, of the date that turned their celebration into a deadline. "Yes," I said, "I know exactly what you mean." That night, I wrote in my notebook longer than I ever had before. April 12. Found appraisal, $412,000. April 12. Purchase agreement drafted, $232,000. Buyer, Willow Creek Holdings LLC, connected to Nathan. April 12. My name not listed as seller. April 12. Closing date scheduled April 30, same day as Nathan's office opening. Then I paused, pen hovering over the page. For months, I had been writing to remember. Now I was writing to prepare. Everything had been arranged without me. Every step planned. Every piece placed. But there was one thing they had not planned for. That I would see it all before the end. I closed the notebook slowly. And for the first time since this began, I did not feel like I was catching up to their story. I felt like I was about to interrupt it. By the time Nathan stepped onto the stage, I had been sitting in the back of that country club ballroom for 27 minutes, listening to people applaud a version of my family that had never really existed. It was strange how beautiful the room was. That is one of the details I remember most clearly. Not because beauty made anything better, but because it made the lie look expensive. The tables were covered in white linen. Small glass vases held cream roses and sprigs of greenery. There were candles in little gold holders, the kind that gave off more atmosphere than light. A jazz trio played softly in the corner, and every so often someone laughed a little too loudly, the way people do when they want everyone nearby to know they belong in the room. I sat at a side table near the back with Marisol to my left, and an empty chair to my right. Claire was there too, but not beside me. That had been the plan. She had flown in that morning and checked into a hotel under her married name. I had not seen her face in person yet, not properly, because we agreed that if Richard or Nathan knew she was involved, they might change the order of the evening or remove the envelope before it reached the microphone. So she sat 3 tables away, near a potted palm, wearing a gray dress and keeping her head slightly lowered whenever Nathan looked in her direction. But I knew she was there, and that mattered more than I can explain. For months, I had felt like a woman alone inside a house full of locked doors. Now, even sitting apart, I could feel the quiet thread between us. My daughter was in the room. Marisol was in the room. Copies of everything were not only in that envelope, but also in Marisol's purse, Claire's hotel safe, and the office of attorney Helen Price, a woman I had met 2 days earlier who looked over the documents for exactly 12 minutes before saying, "Mrs. Whitaker, do not sign anything else." I had not come unprepared. That was new for me. Most of my life, I had arrived at family moments carrying food. Casseroles, birthday cakes, deviled eggs covered in plastic wrap, extra napkins, jackets, someone forgot, medication lists, gifts wrapped with corners folded neatly because my mother taught me that presentation showed respect. That night, I arrived carrying proof. At the front of the room, Richard sat at the table closest to the stage, his back straight, his suit pressed, one hand resting near his water glass. He looked calm, proud, almost tender as he watched Nathan accept congratulations from men in sports coats and women with smooth hair and careful smiles. Every few minutes, Richard's eyes would drift toward me. Not long enough to draw attention. Just long enough to remind me that he knew I was not where I belonged. Or maybe that was what he still believed. Nathan tapped the microphone twice. The room settled. "Good evening, everyone," he said, smiling in the easy way people smile when they have practiced in mirrors. "I can't tell you how much it means to see all of you here tonight." A warm wave of applause rose around him. I looked down at my hands under the table. They were not shaking. That surprised me. I had expected fear to move through me when the moment came. I had expected my breath to catch, my chest to tighten, my body to remember all the years of being told to calm down, sit down, trust Richard, let Nathan handle it, don't make things harder. But what I felt was not fear. It was a kind of sorrowful steadiness. Like standing beside a hospital bed when you already know the test results will change everything, but the patient has not heard them yet. Nathan continued. When I started Whitaker Realty, people asked me what kind of company I wanted to build. And I always said the same thing. I wanted to build something rooted in family, in trust, in legacy. Trust. I felt Marisol shift beside me. She did not speak. She didn't need to. Nathan's wife, Amy, sat near the front with their 2 children. She looked tired, but proud, smoothing her daughter's hair with one hand while keeping her eyes on Nathan. I wondered what she knew. I wondered if she had ever asked why the bank statements made no sense, or whether Nathan had learned from Richard how to keep women close enough to be useful and far enough away from the truth. I wouldn't be standing here without my father, Nathan said. Richard lowered his head modestly, as though praise embarrassed him, though I knew better. Praise was one of Richard's oldest appetites. My father taught me that legacy is about sacrifice, Nathan went on. It's about knowing when to let go of the past so the next generation can build something better. The screen behind him changed, and there it was again. My house. The photo had been taken in spring, probably from the street, with the pear tree blooming in the backyard just visible over the fence. The porch looked freshly washed. My rose bushes were full and red along the railing. In the picture, the house looked peaceful, loved, almost grateful. Under it, in elegant gold letters, were the words, "The Whitaker Family Home Building, the next generation." People began to clap, not because they knew what they were applauding. That was the hardest part. They believed they were witnessing something generous, a father helping his son, a family investing in the future, an old house becoming the foundation of a new business. It sounded noble when Nathan said it that way. That was the gift men like him had. They could take something that belonged to someone else, wrap it in words like sacrifice and legacy, and make a room full of decent people applaud the theft. I stared at the photo. I thought of the pantry door with Nathan and Claire's height marks still penciled along the inside frame. I thought of the dent in the hallway drywall, the bathroom tile I replaced myself, the pear tree, thin and stubborn for years before it finally bloomed. I thought of coming home from night shifts at 6 in the morning, sitting in the driveway too tired to take off my seatbelt, staring at that same house and thinking, at least the children are warm inside. No one had asked what that house meant to me. No one had asked if I was ready to let it become somebody else's origin story. Nathan turned slightly toward Richard. "Dad," he said, his voice thickening just enough to sound emotional. "You believed in me when things were uncertain. You stepped up when it would have been easier to hold on, and I hope I can make you proud with what we build from here." Richard stood. The applause grew louder. He placed one hand over his chest, not dramatically, just enough, the same gesture he had used at the kitchen table when the first hospital bill appeared. I watched it now with a clarity that made my stomach turn. How many times had that hand over his heart moved me into silence? Richard walked to the stage, hugged Nathan, and the room softened around them. People loved that kind of image. Father and son. Continuity. Men standing together in public while women clapped from tables. Then Nathan gestured toward the gift table near the podium. "We also have a few cards and acknowledgments tonight," he said. "Nothing too formal, but some of you sent notes, and you know my dad, he believes gratitude should be spoken out loud." Richard smiled. The envelope sat near the top of the stack. Large, plain, unpretty. My handwriting on the front. For Nathan and Richard. I saw Richard notice it again. This time, he did not look away quickly enough. His eyes narrowed, just a fraction. Nathan followed his gaze, and I watched the first real crack pass between them. Not panic yet. Recognition of possible danger. The kind of look people exchange when they have hidden something together and suddenly cannot remember whether the door is locked. Marisol's hand moved under the table and touched my wrist. Claire looked up from across the room. I could see her face now, pale but steady. The young event coordinator picked up the first card, read a message from the Chamber of Commerce, and everyone clapped. Then a note from a local lender, then a bottle of champagne from an investor named Paul. Ordinary things, safe things. The rhythm settled in. Card. Smile. Applause. Card. Smile. Applause. That was when I understood why public truth mattered. A private confrontation would have become another room where Richard controlled the lighting. Nathan would have interrupted. They would have questioned my memory, my tone, my timing, my emotional state. They would have turned evidence into family drama, and family drama into proof that I was unstable. But this room had a microphone. And witnesses. If you have stayed with Evelyn this far, don't leave now, because the most important part is about to begin. In just a few minutes, the room full of applause for Nathan will have to go silent when they hear the very documents Richard spent a year trying to hide. And if you want more stories where the truth finally gets spoken out loud, you can subscribe, but first, stay with Evelyn in this moment. The event coordinator reached for the next envelope. Mine. She picked it up with both hands because it was heavier than the others. A small, polite laugh moved through the room. "Well," she said into the microphone, "this one has some weight to it." Nathan smiled automatically. Richard did not. The coordinator looked at the front. "This is from Evelyn Whitaker." The room shifted. Not dramatically, but enough. Some people turned. A few looked toward me with mild surprise. Others seemed to be realizing, perhaps for the first time that night, that Nathan's mother had been sitting in the back of the room all along. Nathan's smile held, but barely. Richard stood halfway from his chair. "Maybe we can save that one for later," he said. His voice was calm. Too calm. The coordinator hesitated, looking from Richard to Nathan. Nathan gave a small laugh into the microphone. "Dad, come on. You're the one who said gratitude should be public." People chuckled. Richard looked at him. For one second, I almost felt sorry for Nathan. He still thought he was controlling the room. He thought the envelope was embarrassing, maybe emotional, maybe some old woman's speech about being left out. He did not yet understand that his father's fear was not about sentiment. It was about documents. The coordinator opened the clasp. The red string unwound slowly. I heard it from the back of the room, or maybe I only imagined I did. She pulled out the first page. Her smile faded. She looked at the page, then at Nathan, then back down. The room quieted a little. I sat very still. "Beside me," Marisol whispered, almost too softly to hear. "Now." And for the first time all night, Richard looked afraid. The room did not fall silent all at once. That is not how it happened. At first, the quiet came in layers. A few people stopped whispering near the bar. Someone lowered a champagne glass without drinking from it. The soft scrape of a chair leg sounded too loud against the polished floor. The event coordinator stood at the microphone with my first page in her hand, her smile still trying to behave like a smile, though her eyes had already begun reading ahead. Nathan was still standing beside her. Richard was halfway out of his chair, and I was sitting in the back with my hands folded in my lap, feeling the strange heaviness of a woman who has finally placed the truth somewhere outside her own body. The coordinator cleared her throat. "This is from Evelyn Whitaker," she said again, though everyone had heard her the first time. "To Nathan and Richard." Nathan gave a small laugh, the kind meant to keep the room comfortable. "Mom always writes long notes," he said. A few people smiled politely. The coordinator looked down and began. "Nathan, tonight you are standing in front of this room celebrating a business built on what you are calling family legacy. Your father is being thanked for sacrificing the old family home, so the next generation could build something better. Before everyone applauds that story, I think they deserve to know what was actually sacrificed, who was asked, and who was lied to." The room changed then. Not loudly, just a tightening. Nathan's smile disappeared. Richard stood fully. "Stop," he said. The coordinator looked startled, but she did not step away from the microphone. Nathan turned toward him, confused. "Dad?" Richard moved toward the stage with a quickness I had not seen in months. The man who had leaned on banisters, sighed through dinners, held his chest in the kitchen, now crossed that carpet like a man who had never been weak a day in his life. "That's private family business," he said. The coordinator froze. I stood before I even knew I had decided to. "It's not private when you put my house on a screen and ask people to clap for it," I said. My voice was not loud, but the microphone caught enough of it from the stage that heads turned. Richard stopped. For a second, we looked at each other across the room, and I knew he understood something he had not understood before. I was not going to come to him quietly. Nathan leaned toward the microphone. "Everyone, I'm sorry. My mother has been having some difficulties lately." There it was, the old weapon. Soft, concerned, familiar. "She's been under a lot of stress," he continued. "We've been trying to protect her from some complicated family matters." Claire stood up before I could speak. Her chair scraped back sharply. "No," she said. Nathan turned, and the color left his face so quickly it almost looked like pain. "Claire?" She walked forward from her table slowly, not rushing, not shaking, her gray dress simple against all those polished suits and glittering earrings. "I'm Claire Whitaker," she said, her voice steady. "Evelyn is my mother, and I can confirm she has been deliberately kept from phone calls, letters, and financial information for months." The first murmur passed through the room. Richard's jaw tightened. The coordinator looked from Claire to me, then back at the page in her hand. Something in her expression shifted. She was young, maybe 30, and perhaps she had never been in the middle of a family falling apart in public. But she was holding a document now, and some people, when given truth by accident, still know enough not to drop it. She continued reading. "In February, Richard told me he had suffered a cardiac episode and showed me a hospital bill for $48,216.73. I was told insurance would not cover treatment and that if I did not sign temporary medical paperwork, my husband might not survive another episode." A woman near the front covered her mouth. Nathan stepped toward the coordinator. "Okay, that's enough." Marisol was already moving. She rose from our table and walked toward the side of the room, where attorney Helen Price sat near the exit, quiet and silver-haired, with a leather folder resting on her knees. Helen had not introduced herself to anyone. She did not need to. Marisol handed her a copy of the envelope contents, and Helen opened it with the calm of a woman who had seen too many families use love as a financial instrument. The coordinator's voice trembled slightly now, but she kept reading. "Attached is the bill Richard showed me. Also attached are the actual insurance and provider records from the same period. The true out-of-pocket cost was $612, not $48,000. There was no unpaid emergency cardiac treatment matching the bill I was shown." Richard reached the first step of the stage. "Give me that," he said. Not shouted. Ordered. The tone of a man who expected paper, rooms, wives, and children to obey when his voice dropped low enough. Helen Price stood. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, "I would strongly advise you not to touch any of those documents." The room turned toward her. Richard paused. Nathan looked at her. "Who are you?" "An attorney," she said simply. That word did what no emotional plea could have done. It put a fence around the moment. The coordinator swallowed and continued. "On February 18, 2 days after I signed paperwork I was told was temporary medical authorization, $48,300 was drawn from the home equity line connected to our house. That money was not paid to a hospital, cardiologist, medical practice, or insurance provider. It was transferred to Whitaker Realty Group operating account." Someone near the bar whispered, "Oh my God." Nathan's face hardened. That was a loan. The coordinator stopped. He took the opening. "It was a family loan," he said to the room, raising both hands slightly. "My mother is confused about how it was structured." Claire's voice cut across the room. "She didn't know about it." Nathan looked at her sharply. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know you told me she didn't want to speak to me," Claire said. "I know Dad returned my checks and said Mom refused them. I know both of you told her I only cared about the house. So, yes, Nathan, I know exactly what being lied to sounds like." The room was fully silent now. Note polite silent. Listening silent. The kind of silence that gathers around truth when it finally becomes more interesting than the performance. The coordinator continued, and this time her voice was steadier. "Attached are copies of the home equity statement, transfer confirmation, and the operating account recipient information. Also attached is a photocopy of a church pledge document dated February 12, in which Richard A. Whitaker pledged $52,000 toward a business rescue loan for Nathan Whitaker, with a handwritten note reading, 'Funds secured after house transfer.'" Richard closed his eyes for 1 second. "I saw it. I think Nathan did too," because his expression shifted from denial to anger. "This is insane," he said. "Mom, you need help." I walked forward then. Not to the stage. Not yet. Just far enough that people no longer had to turn all the way around to see me. "I got help," I said. "That's why the papers are here." The coordinator read on. "Attached is the appraisal Richard and Nathan did not show me. The true market value of the home at 184 Willow Creek Lane is $412,000. I was told by Nathan that the house was old, declining in value, and might not sell for more than $250,000. A man in a brown jacket near the front leaned toward his wife. I knew him vaguely from the hardware store. He had once told me my rose bushes were the nicest on the block. The coordinator lifted another page. Attached is the drafted purchase agreement to sell the house for $232,000 to Willow Creek Holdings, LLC, an entity connected to Nathan's business associate. The difference between the appraised value and the proposed sale price is approximately $180,000. There was no hiding the sound that went through the room then. It was not one sound but many. Shock, recognition, discomfort, people understanding at different speeds. Nathan said, "That LLC has nothing to do with me." Helen Price looked down at her folder. "I have state registration documents that suggest otherwise." He looked at her, then at me. For the first time in my life, I saw my son search my face, not for comfort, not for forgiveness, but for weakness. He did not find it. The coordinator's hand moved to the final section. Attached are copies of letters from my daughter Claire that were never given to me, including proof that financial help she attempted to send was returned without my knowledge. Attached also are phone records and a voicemail recording. Richard's head turned slowly toward me. That was the thing he had not known. The voicemail. I had saved it twice. Once on my phone, once on Marisol's flash drive. Claire had transcribed it. Helen had labeled it Exhibit H because lawyers name heartbreak like evidence, which maybe it is. The coordinator looked uncertain. Helen said, "You may read the transcription." The young woman nodded, then read. Richard Whitaker, voicemail to Nathan Whitaker, March 22, 8:14 p.m. "Your mother will sign if we keep her scared. Don't let Claire talk to her too long. She always makes her question things." The room stopped breathing. I do not mean it felt that way. I mean it truly seemed as if every person there took in that sentence and held it, unable to release it back into the air. Your mother will sign if we keep her scared. There are sentences that show people who they are more clearly than any mirror. Richard looked smaller then. Not weaker, just exposed. Nathan's mouth opened, then closed. Claire pressed both hands against the back of a chair, as if she needed something solid to keep standing. Marisol stood near Helen, her face calm but her eyes wet. I walked to the stage. No one stopped me. The coordinator stepped aside and handed me the microphone without being asked. I looked at Nathan first. For a moment he was not the man in the navy blazer, not the realtor, not the son who had taken my keys and my signature and my trust. He was the boy who used to fall asleep on the couch with one hand tucked under his cheek. The boy who once cried because he thought a robin with a broken wing would die in our yard. I had loved that boy. A part of me always would. That was what made what he had done so unbearable. "I am not confused," I said. My voice sounded calm through the speakers. I was frightened. I was lied to. I was isolated from my daughter. I was told my husband might die if I did not sign quickly. I was told I was forgetful when I asked questions. I was called emotional when I defended myself. And while that was happening, my house was being turned into a rescue plan for a business I never agreed to fund. Richard said my name then. Evelyn. He said it the old way. Soft, heavy, meant to pull me back into obedience. I looked at him. "No," I said. "You don't get to use that voice tonight." A few people lowered their eyes. I turned to the room. I worked 22 years of night shifts to help pay for that home. I planted the pear tree in the back. I repaired the kitchen cabinets. I kept my daughter's room ready, even when I was told she didn't care enough to come home. That house is not a legacy gift from Richard to Nathan. It is not a business asset. It is not a closing date. It is my home. My throat tightened, but I did not stop. And the woman who built it was never asked. No one clapped. I was grateful for that. Applause would have made it smaller somehow. Instead, people sat with it. Nathan stepped down from the stage without looking at anyone. Richard remained where he was, one hand hanging at his side, the other still near his chest, though this time the gesture fooled no one. Helen Price moved beside me and took the microphone gently. "For clarity," she said, "Mrs. Whitaker has not authorized the sale of her home. Copies of these documents have been preserved. Any further attempt to transfer, sell, or encumber the property will be addressed through legal channels." That was when several people began leaving quietly, not in outrage, in discomfort. Because truth, when it enters a room built for celebration, makes everyone decide where they stand. Claire came to me then. She did not hug me at first. She asked with her eyes, the way she used to as a little girl after doing something wrong and not knowing if I was still angry. I opened my arms. She came into them hard, almost knocking the breath from me. "I'm sorry," she whispered. You came, I said. I should have come sooner. I should have known. We held each other there in front of everyone, and for the first time that night, I let myself shake. Not from fear, from release. Behind us, the screen still showed the house on Maple Street. The Whitaker family home building the next generation. I looked at those words over Claire's shoulder. For months, Richard and Nathan had tried to write me out of my own life, but they made one mistake. They left enough paper behind for me to write myself back in. For a while after that night, people kept asking me if I felt relieved. I understood why they asked. The sale had been stopped. Attorney Helen Price filed the emergency paperwork the next morning, and by noon there was a legal hold on the house. The closing scheduled for April 30 never happened. Willow Creek Holdings withdrew its offer 2 days later, though everyone knew withdrawal was not the same as innocence. Nathan's office stayed open for exactly 11 more days before the sign came down and the blinds stayed closed. Richard called it humiliation. I called it consequence. The state opened an inquiry into possible elder financial abuse and fraud. Nathan's realtor license was temporarily suspended while the board reviewed his involvement with the LLC, the home equity transfer, and the documents that had been prepared without my clear consent. He sent me one message 3 days after the party. "Mom, this got out of hand. We need to talk as a family." I read it standing by the kitchen sink, with morning light falling over the same counter where he had once slid those papers toward me with colored tabs. Then I deleted it. Because that was not a family conversation. That was a man looking for the door he used to walk through whenever accountability entered the room. Richard stayed in the house for 6 days after the country club. Not because I wanted him there, but because 43 years of marriage do not untangle in one evening, even when the truth is clear. He slept in the guest room. I slept behind a locked bedroom door for the first time in my life. Every morning we passed each other in the kitchen like strangers waiting for the same bus. On the 7th day, Helen came over with 2 folders and a calm face. Richard sat at the dining table. I sat across from him. Claire sat beside me, her hand near mine but not touching it, letting me decide when I needed to be held. Helen explained everything plainly. The investigation, the property protections, the separation agreement, the no-contact rules around financial documents. Richard listened without interrupting, but his face had that closed, injured look I had seen many times before, the one he used when he wanted me to feel cruel for noticing what he had done. When Helen finished, Richard looked at me. "After everything we built," he said, "you're really going to throw me out?" I thought about that word. Built. I looked toward the hallway, toward the pantry door with the pencil marks still inside, toward the kitchen cabinets I had sanded myself, toward the window where the pear tree was visible beyond the glass. "No," I said. "I'm going to let you leave what you tried to take." He packed 2 suitcases that afternoon. Not enough for a life, but enough for a beginning somewhere else. Shirts, medications, shoes, his shaving kit, a framed photo of him and Nathan at some golf event. He did not take our wedding picture from the mantel, and I did not offer it. At the door he paused. "I loved you," he said. I believed him in a way. That was the painful part. People want betrayal to come from people who never loved you, because that makes the story cleaner. But Richard had loved me in the ways that were convenient to him. He loved me when I was useful, loyal, quiet, and willing to trust. He loved the version of me that made his life easier. The woman who stood in that doorway now was not that version anymore. "I loved you too," I said. "That's why it worked." He looked away first. After he left, the house did not feel peaceful right away. It felt enormous. Rooms I had cleaned for decades suddenly echoed. His chair sat empty in the living room. His coffee mug remained in the cabinet. His side of the closet smelled faintly of cedar and starch. I did not dance through the hallway or celebrate with wine the way people imagine women do when they are finally free. I sat on the stairs and cried until Claire came quietly from the kitchen and sat beside me. She did not say, "You're better off." She did not say, "He never deserved you." She just handed me a dish towel because tissues were upstairs, and we both laughed a little through tears because it was such a mother-daughter thing, crying into a towel beside a laundry basket. Claire stayed for 3 months, not in her old room at first. She said it felt strange, like stepping into a version of herself that no longer existed. So we made it a guest room properly. New sheets, a lamp from the thrift store. Her old marching band trophies boxed and placed in the attic, not thrown away, just moved. That became our rhythm, I think. Not erasing, not pretending, just moving things where they belonged now. Nathan did not come by. His wife, Amy, sent one email. She said she had not known the whole story and that she was taking the children to her sister's for a while. I did not answer immediately. A week later, I wrote back only this: "I'm sorry you and the children were pulled into this. I hope you protect yourself." That was all I had to give. By June, the pear tree was full. The blossoms had passed, and small, hard green pears had begun to appear among the leaves. Claire and I drank coffee on the back porch most mornings before she started remote work. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we sat quietly. Healing, I learned, does not always look like deep conversations. Sometimes it looks like two women shelling peas at a kitchen table, or repainting a bathroom, or finally calling the phone company to remove a name from the account. In July, Pastor Samuel asked if I would speak at church about financial safety for older adults. I almost said no. Then I thought of the basement, the photocopied pledge, the paper that found me when I still did not fully believe myself. So I said yes. We started small. Just a table in the fellowship hall after Sunday service. Marisol made a sign with black marker: "Before you sign, ask someone." Helen volunteered one Saturday a month. Pastor Samuel gave us the old office beside the choir room. People brought power of attorney forms, home repair contracts, insurance letters, loan papers from adult children who said they just needed a little help. Some came embarrassed. I knew that look. I would sit across from them and say, "You are not foolish for trusting someone, but you are allowed to verify before you sign." By September, we had helped 9 people avoid documents they did not understand. One widow found out her nephew had added himself to her bank account. A retired mechanic discovered a contractor had put a lien clause into a repair agreement. Another woman, 74, cried in my arms because her daughter had been telling everyone she was confused too. The house stayed in my name. Fully. Legally. Clearly. Helen made sure of that. New filings. New protections. New locks too, because practical things matter as much as emotional ones. I changed the code on the garage door. Removed Nathan's access from every account. Put copies of important papers in 3 places. I kept the blue notebook in my desk drawer, not hidden anymore. Sometimes I still miss the family I thought I had. That is honest. There are mornings when I reach for Richard's mug before remembering. There are evenings when I think of Nathan as a boy and have to sit down because grief does not care what someone did later. Claire and I are rebuilding, but slowly. We lost years. You do not get them back just because the truth comes out. But I have my house. I have my daughter's voice in the next room sometimes. I have Marisol knocking on the back door without waiting to be invited. And I have myself again. If Evelyn's story reminds you of someone who was once made small by their own family, leave a comment for them. If you want more emotional family stories with real secrets, quiet pain, and truth finally coming into the light, subscribe to the channel. And if you are not ready to leave yet, another story is waiting for you right after this one. Evelyn did not win because she yelled louder than her husband. She won because she kept every paper, every message, every detail they thought a 68-year-old woman would forget. The house is still there, the pear tree still blooms, and for the first time in years, Evelyn can sit in her own living room without asking permission from anyone. Sometimes the lesson is not to stop loving your family, but to stop letting love become the pen that signs your life away.